You're listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
It is St. Valentine's Day.
Speaking of Valentine's
Day. Just as we start our segment, we see a flower delivery coming right in the door. Our studios are right in the lobby of the LCMS International Center.
So we see everybody that's coming in and going.
As I was pulling in this morning, I saw the local florist truck leaving. I don't know if they were here at the building next door, but I'm sure they're quite busy today. It's Valentine's Day. And, of course, wouldn't be Valentine's Day with some sort of love story, right?
It's true. Even for us Lutherans that don't talk about feelings ever.
One of our favorite authors, historians, educators, and moms, Heather Smith, joining us today to talk about that historic love story, that monk and priest who married a nun back in the 1500s. Heather Smith, thanks so much for joining us today and talking about Martin and Katie. Thanks for being our guest.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
So what do we know about this love story of Martin and Katie? I'm currently reading Eric Metaxas' story of his book on Luther, and it's really quite fascinating, and I'm learning a little bit about this relationship, but I know that you read way more than I do and know way more history, so that's why I asked you.
Well, I think, interestingly enough, you could kind of say, what do we know? Not a whole lot, and some of what we think we know might not be so true. I've run into a lot of people that seem to have the impression that Katie pretty much set her sights on Luther and then told him that he should marry her, and that's how it all came about. And that is not quite what the historical record gives us. In fact, Katie, shortly after she and the other nuns escaped from the convent, and they were all it was true, they were kind of getting married off, and she fell in love with another man, Jerome Baumgartner, who seemed to return her love, but then probably because of the rank of his family and so forth, that never came to fruition. And then there was another man that was interested in her, but she did, for some reason, maybe just didn't feel that his character was very good. She did not want that marriage to be arranged. And so this is where we get maybe the impression that she was strong-arming Luther, but what she did was she actually talked to or wrote to a friend of Luther's, Nicholas von Armstorff, and just said, I really don't want to marry this other man who's courting me. Please implore Dr. Luther not to try and arrange that marriage. However, if you, Armstorff, or Luther wanted to marry me, I'd be glad to marry either of you. So that's where I guess we get the idea that she was setting her sights on him. Meanwhile, Luther was certainly promoting marriage for former monks and nuns, but he wasn't so sure about it for himself. We think probably because he just knew his life was fraught with danger because of all the writing he'd done and how out of favor he was with so many people, and he wasn't sure that it was wise for him to take on a family. But things gradually changed, and Luther became more convinced by the work of friends and his father and some others that marriage would be a good thing. And it seems that maybe this letter that Katie sent to him through Amsdorff sort of caused him to have compassion for her, and eventually that turned into love. And we know some of the details of when they were married and so forth, but we really don't know a lot more about their courtship. And so if we're thinking in that traditional American love story ends with the wedding and the white dress kind of version, well, that's maybe most of what we know. But I think that you could also say, well, there's also the rest of the story. That, what happens afterwards is just as much a part of the love story and the romance. That Katie and Martin had a very happy marriage, and that's, I think, where you see the real romance of it. Martin gave Katie the keys to the manor, so to speak, and she really ruled the whole household. She managed the household, and then, I think Luther probably had to do some managing of Katie because she was somewhat of a strong-willed person. But I found a great quote from Luther that I thought kind of summed up nicely how he saw that relationship between them. He said, "The man is to acquire and the woman is to save. So the woman can make the man rich, but not the other way around, because a penny saved is better than a penny earned." He really saw that that Katie's managing of the household, which included extensive gardens, raising livestock, brewing beer, hosting boarders, raising children, spinning, managing so many things, that really was a great part of her showing her love for him. And he too wrote, in many different places we get the idea that he really did love and appreciate her very much. And so I think that the marriage there becomes quite a bit the true love story, where you see them acting out the love that grew between them and continued to grow throughout their marriage.
Yeah, I always enjoy reading the stories about their marriage and how well suited they were for each other and how they played off of each other. And it's interesting to see how our view of vocation plays out in that too. What does this story teach us, multiple hundreds of years later, about vocation in our marriages?
I think that's a great point. That the essence of vocation is to love your neighbor through all your actions. And in marriage, this is your closest neighbor, your husband or your wife. So that idea that there are certain things that the husband is going to do and certain things that the wife is going to do, and that they're serving each other in a sense. So by Katie just managing so many things. I've read biographies of her. It just amazes me how much she had to do to run this household. And there were constantly boarders there, people who were, living with them in their household that she was just taking care of, along with everyone else, providing for all of that. That was really, in a sense, her showing her great love for Luther, and then he also in making sure that they had a home and things were provided for. We get the impression that he wasn't as careful with the money as Katie was, but he did make sure that it was his duty to provide and to be the spiritual head of the household. We see that in accounts of their family life and devotion, the table talk things where he's really leading the household in the ways of the Lord and making sure that is at the heart for them. And so those two things complement each other, and that becomes the way that they are loving one another.
I think what's different between then and now is Katie saw brewing beer as an important part of her vocation.
Yes.
That we just it's gone by the wayside. We don't see that as an important part of our vocation for our loved ones today.
It's absolutely. I mean, it was very important. You had to have the brew house, and Luther would say that her beer was the best in Wittenberg, and so
right. He wrote that in letters, didn't he, when he was away?
Yes, he did.
He missed. He missed her, but he also missed the beer that she made for him.
That's fair.
Yes. Yeah. So,
but
yes.
I think how we view vocation, how we view relationships, yes, I think our Western or American view of love and relationships is very different than the courtship view and view of understanding of vocation and how that means loving your neighbor. I think thanks for pointing that out. I think that's really significant here in this story. And there is so much we can learn from this relationship, that we make sacrifices for others because it's out of love for our neighbor, those particularly who are even closest to us in this relationship.
Yes. One of the things that struck me as I was thinking about this topic for today was, thinking about, okay, what things are the same or different? I think something that is perhaps a difference, but really is something that we should take to heart, is how much that the marriage is the focus of the courtship and the love and all of that. It's in our culture, we're sort of pushed towards this idea of just love for its own sake or falling in love. And it really all just sort of boils down to variations on lust versus that goal of marriage. And so even though, at that time, you're starting to get a little more of a marriage based on the wills of the man and woman involved, but there's still a lot of, the rank of your family makes a difference and that sort of thing. But for that, the 1500s or for our time, it's great to remember that the love story doesn't just end with the wedding, but the courtship aspect is just the beginning of learning how you can love this neighbor who's going to be your closest neighbor in marriage.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that we can take away from this or learn from Martin and Katie? We have just about a minute. Anything that we can maybe put into practice? I don't know, today, since it's Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Besides that, Lutheran wives should brew beer for them.
I mean, go start. Yeah.
I think keeping in mind, I love the concept of vocation, and so I'm just going to come back to that to end on that. In courtship that leads to marriage, it is all about vocation, and so the husband, the wife, they each have their duties that are to complement one another, and those things just strengthen their love because as you're acting, you're loving your neighbor.
Heather Smith, educator, author, wife, and mother, and one of our favorite writers and historians. Thanks so much for being our guest this morning and helping us look at the story of Martin and Katie.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that does it for the coffee hour for today. Happy Valentine's Day, St. Valentine's Day today. What was that, second or third delivery of flowers came in while we were talking?
There's another one.
I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@KFUO.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.